Welcome to our Cybersecurity GDPR breakfast workshop. So thank you all for coming today. I know you've all got very busy schedules. So first off, we're going to have Dale from Barclays who's going to talk to us about cyber risks. Then we have Claire from Irwin Mitchell Solicitors. She's going to talk to us about the new GDPR legislation. And then we have Rob from ESET that will talk to us about the solutions out there in terms of encryption for GDPR. Then we have our Nathaniel from Apex, and he'll talk to us about the security audit that we offer from Apex. So the first part of the presentations are going to be on the headwinds that face you guys as business owners, business sort of, management level people. And then the latter part of the presentations will be more on the solutions that can help you guys with the headwinds. Okay, so without further ado, we've got Dale from Barclays to talk to you guys.
My name's Dale Young, and I've been working for Barclays now for just over 9 years. I initially started off as a Premier Service Advisor before moving into Barclays Corporate Banking, where I managed the professionals portfolio, and that was in the SME and larger corporate space. I now work as a digital manager, where I work alongside 3 digital managers, and that's Katie, Nick and myself. And what we do, we actually help educate businesses on cyber security. Okay. So the way I'm actually going to structure today's presentation is that I'm actually going to make it a little bit interactive, if you don't mind. And the reason being is because usually I do this on a webinar format, so usually I'm hiding behind a computer. But in this case, as I'm doing it in front of an audience, I feel I would like to make it a little bit interactive and maybe get you all involved as well, if you don't mind. Now, any questions that I ask you as I go through today's slides, if you don't know any of the questions, just say you don't know it, and it'll be my job and my role to explain that topic in a bit more detail for you. Okay, cool. So the agenda is going to cover a brief overview of cyber security, the top cyber threats to UK businesses and how to remain safe, the current fraud threats, what help is available, and a little bit of further reading for those of you that do want to explore the topic in a bit more detail. Now, just to let you know that I did speak to Anna yesterday, and I did actually say to you that I will be happy to forward on all the slides over to you, okay? So you don't have to worry too much about taking down any notes. Now, for those of you that don't want to receive the slides tomorrow, which I will email over to you, if you just let Anna know, and she'll just remove you from that list, okay? Brilliant. So we'll go straight into it. So what you'll see in front of you here, and can you all see that at the back, is that okay? Okay, so what you can see in front of you here is a slide called Setting the Scene, okay? Now this slide in front of you here actually contains 5 bullet points which have actually been pulled from multiple sources. Now what I want you to do, I just want you all to take a moment and read those 5 bullet points that you see in front of you. And once you've read them, I just want one of you, or all of you maybe, to call out which one of those 5 bullet points strikes you the most that you see.
I think CEO fraud is a known cost.
CEO fraud? Okay, cool. Yeah, really interesting statistic. Okay, so CEO fraud has been known to cost up to 18.5 billion in one instance. Now, obviously we're talking about PLC companies, large corporate organisations. Every week, I always get copied into emails whereby a fraud has occurred, and the amount of money is really substantial. It's a lot of money that businesses can lose. Now, when I also do this on a one-on-one basis, customers are actually also drawn to point 2, which reads, on average, it's 231 days before you know you've been hacked. And looking at the room there, I could actually see a couple of you shaking your heads, okay? So I think quite a lot of you might have been drawn to that stat as well. And that actually tells us a very strong and powerful statement, okay? And it's basically telling us that the software that cyber criminals use in this day and age is so advanced and so sophisticated to the point whereby they could put a virus on your computer and that virus could go undetected for 231 days. You know, that is a long time. That is around 7 months. Now, if we was to put that into perspective, you might log onto your online banking platform, or your finance department may do it twice a day, minimum, okay? They may do it once in the morning to see what transactions have come in overnight, and they may do it once in the afternoon just to see what transactions are coming during the day. Now, if they do that on day one, just think about all the content they'll be looking at over the course of 7 months. Because during that period, no doubt they'll be looking at the direct debit screen, the standing order screen. If you've got new suppliers to pay, you'll be inserting new sort code and account numbers on your online banking platform. And all the while, whilst you're doing that, that virus could be in the background taking screenshots of all your information and sending it back to the cyber criminal. Okay? So the message we've got for you here is that cyber criminals are not necessarily always out after your money. In some cases, they will be there to try and steal and take data from you. Okay? So now we briefly understand the risk of cybercrime on businesses. What I'm now going to do is take you through the methods and mindset of a cyber criminal. And the next slide we're going to talk about now is on social engineering. Okay? Now, does anyone want to hazard a guess as to what I might mean by social engineering? Okay, no problem. Now, social engineering is basically someone going on the internet to find out as much information as they can about a business or a person to then use that information against them. This could be impersonating them or even conning them into undertaking an action. Okay? So I'll just put that into perspective. Let's just say I was a cyber criminal. Okay? And let's just say I wanted to target someone in today's room. I know there's someone called Tony in today's room, so let's just say I wanted to target Tony. Now, if I wanted to target Tony and I was a cyber criminal, what I'll do, I'll try and research Tony. So I'll take Tony's name, type it into the likes of Google, and see what information crops up about him. But I won't stop there, because I'll also make use of the social media platforms as well, like Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, just to see what information crops up about Tony. And the kind of things that I'll be looking out for are things like, is Tony family orientated? Does he work in multiple offices? Has he been on holiday recently? And so forth. And that is basically what social engineering is. So just to summarise, social engineering is a cyber criminal researching their victim before they send a virus to their computer. Okay, does that make sense? Cool. So what I'm going to do, I just want to raise of hands here. Based on what I've just said about what social engineering is, what percentage of cybercrime do you feel involves social engineering? Okay, so people who believe it's below 50%, raise your hands. Okay. People who believe it's above 50%, raise your hands. Okay, cool. Well, it is actually 88%. Okay, so thanks for all getting involved. But it is 88%, and the reason why it's so high at 88% is because it's proven to be really effective when a cyber criminal conducts that research. Okay, and I'll give you an example. Let's just say a cyber criminal wanted to target me. Okay, now if a cyber criminal wanted to target me and they were able to view my Facebook page, they would see quite clearly, and please do not hold this against me, that I'm a big fan of Manchester United Football Club. Okay, I don't mind saying it here, considering it's just around the corner. And what the cyber criminal can now do, now that they know that little bit of information, is that they can now create an email claiming to be from Manchester United Football Club, trying to sell me next season's season ticket with 30% off. Now, of course, if I've got that email, I'm going to be interested in it. I'm going to be interested in it because A, I'm a big fan of Manchester United, but secondly, I would love to save 30% off my season ticket, typically because, as you all know, who are season ticket holders, they are very expensive. That's where then I might be enticed to find out more. So I may then click on a link, open up an attachment, or even make a payment to the cyber criminal. Okay? So that is why the cyber criminals do that element of research, so that they can influence us and manipulate us. Okay? So what I'm going to do now, I'm now going to take you through the steps of what a cyber criminal will do once they've done that element of social engineering, and what they'll then start doing, they will actually then start creating what we call is a phishing email. Now I'm sure in this day and age, you all know what a phishing email is. If you probably checked your inbox this morning, you may have actually received one. Okay? So a phishing email is basically an email appearing to be from a reputable company, with the goal of influencing and gaining personal information. Okay? So let's just have a look at one. Now what I'm wanting to do is just draw your attention to the email on the left hand side, okay? So just that email there, okay? And what I want you to do, I just want you, if you feel comfortable, just to call out anything that strikes you as being odd about this email. So in other words, if you received this email in your inbox this morning, what would alarm you about it based on its appearance here? Does anyone want to call anything out? Okay, good.
Exclamation mark.
Excellent.
What's that?
Okay, cool. Excellent.
It's referring to dear customer rather than the individual name or email address.
Brilliant. You've actually made my life easier there.
You won't be able to access your account.
Perfect. Okay, cool. Okay, excellent. That's fantastic. You really did call out a lot of things there, really quickly as well, so that's great. So yeah, so someone mentioned it reads adjustment to your account settings. You know, be careful of those emails that are trying to put you under pressure. Okay, in this case, it says adjustment to your account settings. It's in bold with exclamation marks. Okay, so be careful of those emails. And the reason being is because cyber criminals like to put pressure on us. Okay, the reason why they like to put pressure on us is because, you know, we're all humans, and that is one of the biggest tricks. And that is when we are most vulnerable at making a mistake, is when we're under pressure. Now, someone also mentioned the fact that it reads eBuy, okay? It does not read eBay. But they've used the same marketing colours as eBay. Now, arguably, if we was under pressure and we was in panic mode, we may have missed that mistake, okay? The next thing that would alarm me as well, as this gentleman mentioned, is the fact that it says dear customer, okay? It doesn't say dear Dale or dear Tony or dear Anna. So therefore, it's a generic email, it's not personalised, so that's another thing that should alarm you. Now, opening up the email and just reading it, just like you've just done, is not actually going to cause you any harm, okay? What will cause you harm, though, is when you click on links and open up an attachment. So I'll just give you a bit of a tip, what you can do to verify whether an email is genuine or not, okay? Now, if you receive this email in your inbox and you're unsure whether it's genuine, what I want you to do, or what you can do, is just hover your cursor over this link. Do not click on it, whatever you do. Just gently hover your cursor over it. Just above the link that you'll see, there'll be a web address, okay? Now, the web address will usually be displayed just above the link or at the bottom left-hand side of your screen here. Now, if the web address does not mirror what is on the link, then that is a good indication that what you're seeing is a fraudulent email, okay? It will not be as obvious and say phishing scam, but you know what I mean, it'll just be a different link, okay? So just be wary of those emails, and that's just something you can do if you want to trial that at home, okay? Now, the next thing that I want to draw your attention to here, which is a little bit more sophisticated with cyber criminals, and this is something called spoof emailing or spear emailing, okay? Now, what cyber criminals are currently doing at the moment is that cyber criminals are currently trying to spoof your email address, okay? So the email address that you own, both for business and personal use, can be spoofed. And once the cyber criminal spoofed your email address, what they'll then do, they'll then send an email to all of your friends, all of your colleagues, all of your family members, pretending to be you, trying to get them to click on a link, open up an attachment, or even make a payment. So the message we've got for you here is this. If you ever get an email from any of your friends, any of your colleagues, any of your family members, and the email does strike you as being odd or unusual, always just make a quick call to that individual and just get them to confirm whether they sent that email or not. Because not only will you be protecting yourself, you'll also be alerting that individual that their email has been hacked. Okay? As you can see here, spear phishing, it goes very subtly really, because as you can see, this cyber criminals try to impersonate to be David Smith, but actually they've put 2 T's in Smith, okay? So they've spelled Smith wrong, so that's how they get by it, okay? Now just a brief stats that I've actually discovered this morning. After 1 million phishing emails that are sent, so the emails on the left-hand side, approximately 25 people, oh no, sorry, yeah, 35, I think it was 35 people will click on that link. So that's good in a way, because 35 out of 1 million is actually quite a good stat, and that goes to show that people are actually more aware and savvy around the phishing emails, which is brilliant, okay? However, when it comes to spear emailing, every million emails that are sent, 25% of the population will click on that email. Okay, so the spear emailing is a lot more successful now than the phishing emails, so just be careful of those emails. Okay, so the next slide I want to bring your attention to now is just on CEO impersonation fraud. Now I know there's a lot of senior leaders within this room today, so a lot of this may apply to yourselves. So basically, all we want you to do is just be careful, because like I just mentioned to you on the previous slide, whereby a cyber criminal will try and replicate an individual's email address, this is actually whereby a cyber criminal will go one step further and they'll try and replicate to be the CEO, the managing partner, the senior partner, and so forth. And once they've replicated that email address, what they'll then do, they'll then create an email pretending to be that individual and send it to everybody within your organisation. Okay, pretending to be that senior leader, trying to get someone to click on a link, open up an attachment, or even make a payment. So the message we've got for you here is this, and that is, it's all well and good educating your finance team on this topic, okay? However, we do need to go one step further. We need to start educating anybody who has email access within your company and within your organisation, because all it does is take one person to click on that link and it could put a very sophisticated virus onto your network, okay? Now, one statement that I like to use when I do these presentations is this, and that is, your company, your organisation is only as strong as its weakest link, okay? So it's really important we get talking about this topic. Okay, so the next slide we're moving on to now is just on social engineering. So what I've done, I've put 2 slides into play, which is just going to give us a bit of an overview as to how vulnerable we can be when it comes to using social media platforms. So here's an example of a guy called John Smith, who was at Manchester Airport, and whilst John was at Manchester Airport, John heard on the announcement that his flight is likely going to be delayed by 15 minutes. Okay? So what John did, and we've probably all been in this situation before, John thought, do you know what, I'm sick of waiting around there, I'll make use of my 15 minutes. So John took to Twitter and tweeted this message. Hey, at Budget Airlines UK, your gate at Manchester Airport should have been open 15 minutes ago. What's happening? Hashtag not good enough. Now, John has done nothing wrong there tweeting that message. In fact, it's actually quite encouraging to tweet messages like this on social media, because as you all know yourself, businesses are so protective of their reputation that individuals do tend to like to write complaints online, okay? Because they'll know you respond. However, what John doesn't realise is that cyber criminals could be monitoring Budget Airlines tweets. And John has actually leaked quite a lot of information there. He's leaked the fact that he's at Manchester Airport, which indicates he's going away. He's also leaked the fact that his flight is 15 minutes delayed. Okay? Now what the cyber criminal can now do after seeing that, now bearing in mind we've also got the time the message was tweeted, which was 1:50. Okay, so the cyber criminals can now have a think about what time his flight was due to depart. So what the cyber criminal will do, the cyber criminal will now go onto Manchester Airport's website, find out what flights are currently delayed from Manchester Airport's website, and the cyber criminal will then make an educated guess as to which one was John's flight, and off the back of that, the cyber criminal will create this email. Here is an email sent by a cyber criminal claiming to be from Budget Airlines, apologising to John that his flight is delayed, offering John 50% off his next flight, as well as a first-class complimentary upgrade. All John needs to do is just click on that link there. Okay? Problem is that this was actually sent by a cyber criminal. Okay? And the moment John clicks on that link, it will direct him to a web page that's affected with viruses, or even worse, it may actually ask John to insert his personal details, like his home address or his date of birth, and that could then leave John open up to identity fraud. And trust me, you do not want your personal details leaked on the dark web. The cyber criminal will make a right meal out of it. Okay, so just be careful. It's a very clever trick, this one, so just be careful, okay? Now again, in order to identify the email, whether it's genuine or not, don't get excited thinking you're going to get compensation. What we want you to do is hover your cursor over the link here, you know when I mentioned on the eBay email, and just see if the image above it is the same. What you can also do as well is hover your cursor over the email address. Okay, don't click on it, hover your cursor over it, because if it's fake, behind it, it will reveal another email address and it will just be talking a different language to you. It will make sense that it's not genuine. Okay, but ultimately, what would be best is to actually call the company up by calling the company displayed on the company's website and just get them to confirm whether the email is genuine or not. Okay. Cool, so the next slide we're moving on to now is just on further examples of social engineering. And the first one I've got here is just on vishing. Okay, so that's vishing with a V. Okay. Now, what can happen here is that a cyber criminal will call you up, pretending to be your bank manager or someone from the police, trying to obtain personal information from you. Now, if you was to ever get that call, just put the phone down straight away. Okay. Now, one thing that I just want to alert you to as well, which I've only found out a couple of days ago, is that cyber criminals now have access to this app, okay? And this app was actually published in China, and what the app is able to do, the application is actually able to direct or route a call through a corporate switchboard, okay? So let's just say you've got Barclays' phone number in your mobile phone. The cyber criminal can call you up by using this app. It will divert through a corporate switchboard, a Barclays switchboard. You'll then get a call thinking it's a Barclays call, but it's not. It's from a cyber criminal. The cyber criminal will then impersonate to be a representative from the bank, and they will try and convince you that your online banking platform has been compromised and that they need you to temporarily move money out of your bank account. Okay? Now, under no circumstances, listen to that call if you get it. Under no circumstances will Barclays ever call you up asking you to move money. We will never do that, so just be wary. Now, I know I work for Barclays Bank, so clearly I do represent that company. However, I just want you to have an open mind when you get this call, okay? Because it doesn't matter who you bank with, okay? It could happen to any institution, so just be careful. The next one is just on smishing, okay? Now, this is whereby a fraudster will send you a text message, again, claiming to be from Barclays Bank, asking you to click on a link. Now, under no circumstances will Barclays ever send you a text message asking you to click on a link, okay? We may send you a message to say, we've noticed some unusual transactions out of your bank account. Can you confirm whether you sent those payments by responding yes or no? But we will not ask you to click on a link. So just be careful of that one as well. And the last one is on mobile bugs. Now, this year, we have seen the introduction of mobile malware that has become considerably more sophisticated than what's been there before. So all we want you to do is just be careful when you are downloading apps to your mobile phone. And then when you do download apps to your mobile phone, just make sure you are downloading them by using credible websites like the Apple Store or the Android Store, and try to avoid using any third-party websites. Now, I'm directing this at you, but really I should be probably directing it to your children as well, okay? Because no doubt you lend your iPhone to your child to, you know, if they've done well at school or whatever, but we need you to be careful because sometimes children want to get access to games that aren't released in Europe, okay? And to get access to those games, they will have to go through a third-party website. And that's where they're likely to get a mobile bug on them. Okay, so when they hand the phone back to you, you would not realise it, but the app they've just bought is from a third-party website and it's contained a mobile bug. So just be careful when you are lending your phone out to your children as well. Okay, so what we're going to do now, I'm now going to talk about sort of different types of viruses that are out there. And the first one I'm going to talk about is just on malware. Okay. So basically, malware is basically a malicious virus that can be transported onto USB sticks, mobile phones, and so forth. Okay, so there's different types of viruses out there, but the broad term of a virus is called a malware. Now what I've done here, I've just listed 4 ways of how you can get malware on your computer system. Now 3 of which I've listed is actually quite self-explanatory, so I won't go into too much detail. However, I will go into detail on the first bullet point because I think that's quite important, okay? So that'll be the likes of removable storage device, okay? So that'll be the likes of USB sticks, CDs and DVDs, okay? We just need to be careful. And I'll give you an example. Let's just say someone in your office wants to use a USB stick on your computer, okay? If they want to use a USB stick on your computer, I don't want you to question the integrity of that person, but what I want you to question is, where did they buy that USB stick from, okay? Because it is rumoured that cyber criminals are selling USB sticks online at a very cheap price. The only problem we have here is that when we buy that USB stick online, you actually do not know the person selling you that product. And that person could be a cyber criminal. So we just need you to be careful when you're buying USB sticks online, especially when it comes to eBay or anything like that. So just be careful. The next one is just on passwords. Now, the way we see passwords is that we see passwords as being the front door keys to an organisation. And what I've done here, I've just listed 4 ways of how a cyber criminal can get hold of your password. Now again, 3 of which is pretty much self-explanatory, but one that I want to draw your attention to is on the second bullet point, and that is called a brute force attack. Now a brute force attack is an automated effort to hack into your password. Now what these cyber criminals have with them, this device that they use, okay? And this device that they use knows all the words in the English dictionary, and knows all the most popular passwords which have been leaked online. That is why it's really important to make sure that your password is long in length, which contains a combination of upper and lowercase letters, numbers and special characters, just so it protects you from that device that they've got and they will use on you. Okay, so the next one is just on ransomware, okay? Now some of you might be thinking, what the hell is ransomware, okay? However, you actually might be quite familiar with it, okay? Because if we cast our memories back to March of this year, who remembers that the NHS got attacked? Yeah, we all remember that? Okay, excellent. Well, I was in the States at the time, and it hit global headlines, even in America. It was a real big deal, and that was actually a ransomware attack. So basically, someone within the NHS clicked on a link which had a virus on it, it encrypted all the files on that particular network, and in order for those files to be decrypted, the cyber criminal demanded a payment. So in this case, it was through Bitcoin, which is becoming rather popular at the moment. Okay. So again, we just want you to it's just a case of raising awareness here. You know, just be careful what links you're clicking on, be careful what sites you're going on, and that in order to protect yourself from this type of virus, is that we want you to start thinking about backing up your data. And I'm sure a lot of you do it already in this room, but you can back up your data a number of ways. You can do it by buying a USB stick from a credible company. You can do it by moving data to the cloud. You might have heard of Apple Cloud or Google Cloud. Or you can do it by buying a standalone computer, which is separate from the network, and back up data that way as well. Okay, so the next slide we're moving on to now is just on a common types of attack. So I wouldn't mind a raise of hands here. How many of you have used the free public Wi-Fi? Okay, cool, okay. I have as well, okay, my hand's raised, okay. I use it a lot, however I am very, very careful when I do use the free public Wi-Fi, okay. The reason being is because cyber criminals can actually hack in to that public Wi-Fi line, okay. Now when they hack into that public Wi-Fi line, they're not able to move money out of your bank account or anything like that. But what they are able to do is view all the content that you're currently looking at on your mobile phone, okay? So let's just say you was in a coffee shop, okay, and you was looking at your bank statement, okay? Now if a cyber criminal was within that premises, they will see that you're looking at your bank statement and they will take a screenshot of it, okay, because they might find it useful. Same applies to when you're buying someone, you know, a Christmas present. You know, you might think, oh, I need to do some shopping on Amazon. You know, they'll wait until you get to your payment details section and they'll take a screenshot of your payment details. Now what I do when I'm using the public Wi-Fi is that when I'm using the public Wi-Fi, I will only look at things that are publicly available to me, like BBC Sports or Sky News. Okay? The moment I want to look at confidential information, I will go into my settings on my iPhone, I will turn off the Wi-Fi, and I will then switch on the 3G and 4G. You know, your data allowance? that is actually encrypted and is considered to be a lot more secure for you. Certainly more secure than public Wi-Fi. Does everybody know what I mean by data allowance and 3G and 4G, yeah? Just make sure though that your Wi-Fi connection is switched off before you go, because sometimes it can switch between the two. Okay. The next one is just on DDoS attack. Okay. Now DDoS stands for Distributed Denial of Service. Now what could happen here is, let's just say a cyber criminal has control of 50,000 computers. The users of those computers do not know it yet, but the cyber criminal has full control. And what the cyber criminal can do, the cyber criminal can instruct all 50,000 computer users to be directed to your company's website. Now if you have 50,000 computers being directed to your website all at once, that is actually a hell of a lot of traffic, and it could actually cause your website to go down, and that is what we call a DDoS attack. Now, it's pretty much the same as when we buy tickets, you know, to Glastonbury or anything like that. You know, the server gets inundated and therefore it crashes. That's pretty much what a DDoS attack is, except for it's controlled by a cyber criminal. The next one is just on invoice fraud, okay? So again, it's just to raise awareness here, because I'm sick of getting emails whereby businesses have not done their checks on any letters that they receive, okay? So all we want you to do is just be careful when you get letters from suppliers or businesses or customers that you deal with telling you that they've switched bank accounts and they need you to amend your records, okay? Now if you do get those letters in, we need you to do your checks, okay? Do not act on the letters alone, okay? Because if you act on those letters alone and you amend those details, the next time you come to make a payment, the chances are that then that payment is going to be directed to a cyber criminal, okay? So just want to raise of hands, how many of you do checks on any invoices or any letters you receive when it comes to account detail changes? Cool, okay, that's good. Now for those of you that didn't raise your hands then, what we want you to do is that we want you to have processes in place. One of those processes being that if you get a letter from anybody, or business or anybody, we want you to do your checks. And one of those checks should be is that you call that company up directly by calling the number displayed on the company's website and get them to confirm whether they sent that letter or not, okay? It's really, really important that you do that. What you have to remember is, it's very easy for me to impersonate any business in this room, okay? Any business in this room, I can impersonate a letter, okay? All I have to do, go on Google Images, take the logo, put it on a Word doc, write a letter, and I bet if I sent that invoice or that letter telling you that account details have changed to 100 businesses, I reckon at least 15 businesses will actually change those records without even doing those checks. Okay? So it's really important we have those protocols in place. Honestly, I think it was yesterday, an email came through where a corporate company didn't check that invoice and they lost about £500,000 nearly. Okay? So we need to start checking those details. So what support is available? So we've got the NCSC. Now the National Cyber Security Centre was brought to life to bring the UK cyber expertise together to transform how the UK tackles cybersecurity issues. So I think it was about a year and a half ago now, the government are really concerned about cybercrime, so they put aside £1.7 billion to form the National Cyber Security Centre. So this might be the first time you've seen this logo for some of you, but I think soon you'll start seeing it more often, because they're going to start delivering annual reports about what's currently going on in England and businesses, and it's probably likely going to get media attentions just to educate ourselves. The next one is just on CISP. Now CISP is a joint industry government initiative to share cyber threat and vulnerable information. And finally, we have Cyber Essentials. Now some of you might be familiar with this again. Cyber Essentials is a national recognised certification establishing that you take cyber security seriously. Now what businesses are doing at the moment is that businesses are currently undergoing the Cyber Essentials course. Once those businesses complete that course, what they'll then do, they'll then take the Cyber Essentials logo here, copy it and display it onto their business websites. Typically because some businesses believe that it may put the cyber criminals off if it shows that they've been accredited by Cyber Essentials. I doubt it a little bit, but it's worth a try. The next slide is just on further reading. Now, as I said, you're going to get these slides anyway. I've just put a couple of links here whereby it directs you to a number of articles, a number of videos, all of which I'm sure you might find useful if you did want to explore the topic in a bit more detail. I know I mentioned earlier about Cyber Essentials. If you do want to know more about it, it's just here, okay? And what it is you can hover your cursor over it when I send them out to you. And the final slide is just to say thank you so much for joining me today. You know, I've really enjoyed it. You've all been really interactive. Appreciate you all getting involved. If there's one way on how we can beat cybercrime, it is on user education. The more people we educate on this topic, the less likely those people will be fooled into clicking a link which can have a virus on it, open up an attachment, or even making a payment. Now, I just want to let you know, Barclays are really keen in supporting as many businesses as we can when it comes to cybersecurity. Now, I actually do cybersecurity webinars with my team, and we educate businesses. Doesn't matter what size they are, we educate businesses and their staff, okay? And it's absolutely free of charge. So for those of you that do want to educate your staff, and you do want a free cybersecurity webinar with your firm, all you have to do is just email that inbox, and me and one of my colleagues will actually pick that up, we'll reach out to you, we'll fire over some dates, and hopefully we can fit a date that will suit you. It's usually an hour long. Obviously I've congested quite a lot of material in space of 30 minutes, and it is your time as well. So any staff members that have any questions at all, they will be answered immediately, and obviously we'll get to a point whereby they understand the topic better than they did when they first started to join the webinar. Okay, brilliant. Well, I just want to say, you know, thank you ever so much for Anna inviting me here today. Hopefully you have found this session useful, and yeah, thank you ever so much.
Hi everyone, thank you all for coming this morning. So as Anna said, my name is Claire Stockill. I am a solicitor at Irwin Solicitors, based over in their Leeds office, and my team and I specialise in data protection, and specifically the new General Data Protection Regulation, which I'm going to talk to you about this morning. So typically when we speak to clients or people that don't know very much about data protection or GDPR, we hear quite a lot of doom and gloom. People are worried about it, they're not sure what it's going to mean for their businesses and the impact that it's going to have. So we try to explain it in a bit of a carrot and a stick. So in terms of the carrot, there are good things in terms of GDPR and getting compliance right. So if you start positioning the way you're handling personal data correctly, making sure you've got the right consents in place where you need them, and you're working towards GDPR compliance, this helps you to build up the kind of the trust and confidence that your customers and your staff have in you, that they know you're using their personal data correctly and they know you're keeping it secure. In terms of the stick, you might have heard about the new fines. So currently the ICO, who is the UK's Data Protection Authority, has the power to impose fines of up to £500,000 for breaches of the current Data Protection Act. But under GDPR, the ICO is going to have the power to issue fines of up to €20 million or 4% of annual global turnover, whichever is higher, for serious data protection breaches. So it's quite a shift towards much bigger fines for breaches of data protection law. So what I'm going to have a look at this morning is just a bit of a kind of a brief explanation of GDPR, and then what we're kind of advising people to start doing now in terms of the steps they should be taking to make sure they're becoming compliant with the new regulations. So it will replace the Data Protection Act 1998 on the 25th of May 2018. It's European legislation, and it's a regulation which means it's directly effective in the UK. And we know this is going to happen in spite of Brexit, because we've had the Data Protection Bill. So we're going to have a new Data Protection Act 2018 which comes into force next year, which implements GDPR in full, with some areas that have been left to national law. So some, for example, areas like crime and taxation. Some of the exemptions are dealt with by national law as well under the new Data Protection Bill, which is kind of going through House of Parliament at the minute, and it'll be finalised next year. So what is captured by GDPR? It applies to data controllers and data processors. So a data controller is an organisation that collects personal data, decides what it's going to do with it, makes decisions about it, how it's held, how it's used, and kind of is the person that's in control of that personal data. A data processor is an organisation that does something on behalf of a data controller. So examples that you might think of are things like if you have outsourced IT support and they can access your systems with personal data on them, or if you have outsourced HR support or payroll support, that kind of thing. those organisations will be processing personal data on your behalf, and you'll be a data controller and they'll be a data processor. Personal data is defined very broadly. It's effectively any piece of information that identifies a living individual, or that could identify them kind of in conjunction with other bits of information that you have. So things like name, address, email address, date of birth, that kind of thing. But also if you have databases where you identify people by ID numbers, for example, that could form part of their personal data because it allows you to identify them. So really anything that identifies somebody. And the GDPR applies to the processing of personal data by automated and non-automated means. So that's effectively, again, defined very broadly as any sort of use and collection of personal data, whether that's on your computer systems and we sometimes find clients are surprised to hear that it does also apply to paper filing systems. So any structured paper files that you have that contain personal data will also need to be held and looked after in a GDPR compliant way. There are two types of personal data set out on the side. So ordinary personal data, so that's again things like your name, your date of birth, your email address, job title, that kind of thing. And then also sensitive personal data, or GDPR defines it as special categories of personal data. So this is a specifically defined category, and it includes things like your ethnic origin, religion, your health information, information about your criminal records and that kind of thing. And this is a set list of information that is treated to kind of a higher standard than ordinary personal data. So the first thing that we're currently advising clients to do if they haven't already started thinking about GDPR compliance is to carry out a data audit. So this is really going back to basics of finding out across your business, all your different business units, what personal data you're holding, how you're using it and what you need it for. Because under the Data Protection Act now and under GDPR, for every type of personal data that you are using, you need to have what's called a lawful purpose to be using it. And we're advising people that just because what they were doing was kind of considered compliant under the Data Protection Act, they shouldn't necessarily think that's the case under GDPR. So as part of the data audit, it's really looking over all your systems, any kind of hidden databases that people might have that you're not aware of, and just finding out everything that the business holds that processes personal data, and analysing whether or not it has a lawful purpose to be doing that. Because one of the key areas of GDPR compliance is thinking about accountability. So we kind of think of it as being similar to the FCA regime in that you need to be doing the right thing and you need to be compliant, but you also need to be able to demonstrate that you're doing the right thing, so documenting your decision making, making sure you've considered your use of personal data, you've made clear decisions about it and shown how you can be GDPR compliant, so that if anything happens and the ICO gets involved and there's an investigation, you've got kind of documented reasoning behind all your decisions relating to personal data usage. So lawful purposes for ordinary personal data I've set out on the slide there, and I think we are sending out copies of the slides so you'll be able to kind of have a look at them. But one of the things that we hear about, and it's a bit of a misconception, is that consent is either the only way to use people's personal data or it's the best way to use people's personal data, and that's not necessarily the case, because relying on consent leads to thinking about issues around whether or not you've kind of collected consent in a compliant way, and it also can trigger things like the right to be forgotten, which I'll talk about a bit more later on. So what we advise people to do is when they're carrying out this data audit process is to look at other legal ways to be using personal data. So the key ones for businesses to think about are where it's necessary for the performance of a contract. So that's things like you need to collect customers' names and addresses, you need to collect information from your staff, the names, the date of birth, their ID, and you need to do those things in order to be able to carry out the contracts that you have in place with them. And also where you're complying with your legal obligations, so from an HR perspective where you're collecting staff data, you need to do that to comply with your employment law obligations. Another one of the ones to think about is where it's in your legitimate interest as a business to be able to use personal data in a particular way, and those legitimate interests don't outweigh the rights that the individuals have to kind of privacy over their personal data. So where you want to rely on legitimate interests, you need to kind of have a decision-making process in place as to what those legitimate interests are and why you think they're not kind of overly intrusive to the rights that people have to kind of privacy over their personal data. So where you are relying on consent, and typically this tends to be in a marketing context, so you need to have consent to be able to send marketing communications to people. The GDPR places a higher threshold on obtaining consent from people, so set out on the slide there that consent needs to be unambiguous, it needs to be freely given, it needs to be a clear affirmative action, and needs to be specific. So what we're advising people to do now is look at the wording that they have where they're collecting consent from people, and ideally they should be reviewing that wording, making sure it meets this high standard, and if not, amending the wording of their tick boxes, and making sure they're not doing things like relying on opt-out tick boxes. We know that consent has to be, you have to be relying on opt-in tick boxes, so you can clearly demonstrate that people have made that conscious decision to tick a box and say, yes, I'm happy to receive that kind of marketing communication from the business. It can be withdrawn at any time, and again, that's one of the issues with consent. If you're relying on consent and that's kind of how you positioned yourself, and someone for using their personal data and they withdraw that consent, then you'd have to stop doing what you were doing. It's not available where there is an imbalance in the relationship between the parties. So we have some current kind of draft guidance from the ICO as to what they think consent under GDPR should look like. It's not finalised yet, but they explain that it shouldn't be relied upon in an employment context because employees don't necessarily have the right to say yes or no to what employers are doing with their personal data because of the imbalance in the relationship. So again, it's looking at things like your employment contracts and staff handbooks and making sure that they're not positioned in a way that you're suggesting your employees are consenting to how you're using their personal data, when actually how you're using it is because it's necessary to comply with your legal obligations and performing the employment contract. Other things that have come out of the ICO's consent guidance is that consent needs to be refreshed every 2 years. So currently under the Data Protection Act, consent should be refreshed. You're going back out making sure people are still happy to receive marketing communications from you. But what the ICO has said is that she wants that to be happening every 2 years. So making sure there's a process in place to make sure that's actioned within the business. If you are data sharing, so you want to allow third parties, including kind of intra-group sharing of personal data so that other third parties can market to people, you need to be having separate tick boxes to allow people to say, I'm okay to be contacted by that person but not that person, and making sure that, again, the consent they're giving is freely given and specific. So the advice we're giving is to be redrafting consent wording, looking at your tick boxes, where do you rely on consent, can you rely on another legal basis, and redraft those tick boxes and make sure that they contain a lot more detail and allow people to really be given very kind of specific and informed consent. One of the things that we're seeing the ICO issuing kind of fines with at the minute is where companies are dressing up marketing consents or kind of trying to get people to consent to marketing by dressing it up as a service message. So things like sending out emails to your whole database to say, why don't you log on and update your preferences? If you consent to receiving marketing from us, we'll kind of enter you into a prize draw where you can win some free tickets or something like that. And the ICO has said if you send those kind of communications out to people who haven't already opted in to receive marketing, that counts as marketing in of itself, so you can be falling foul of GDPR and marketing law, so that companies have been issued fines of kind of £10,000 for doing that kind of thing, so just be careful. So transparency is another one of the key areas of GDPR that we're advising companies to look at now. So currently, if you're a data controller, you have to register with the ICO every year, you pay your £35 fee and they know that you're a data controller. That requirement is taken away under GDPR because the idea is that instead of notifying the ICO that you're a data controller, the best thing to do is to just be more transparent with individuals about how you're using their personal data and provide more information upfront to individuals. So what we're advising companies to do is, again, look at their privacy policies on their websites, look at their fair processing notices, look at their staff handbooks, how they explain how they use personal data. And GDPR has a long list of things that you need to be telling people when you collect personal information from them, and it's highly likely that those documents won't contain everything that they're supposed to contain now. So it's things like who you are, your contact details, what personal data you're collecting, how you're using it, what your lawful basis, what your lawful purposes are for using it, and then telling people about your retention practices, how long you're keeping their data, telling them about their rights over their personal data, so things like they have the right to complain to the ICO if they're not happy, they have the right to be forgotten in certain circumstances, so there's a long list of mandated information that you need to be providing. So this is a good idea to look at these documents now and update them to make sure they contain everything they need to contain, and that they're doing that in a concise and easily accessible manner, and they're addressed to the right level of people who they're meant to be kind of addressed to. So data retention is one of the things that under the Data Protection Act now, you shouldn't be keeping personal data for longer than you need it. Under GDPR, that's a clear obligation, so businesses shouldn't be holding on to personal data indefinitely. They should be looking at the personal data that they have across the different kind of business areas and deciding kind of how long they need to keep that personal data for the reason that they collected it. And say one size doesn't fit all, because even across one business, one size doesn't fit all, so you need to look at the different kind of areas of the business and how long they need to keep personal information, and they should only be keeping it for as long as they need it for that purpose. So for example, you might, from an HR perspective, keep a prospective CV that comes in for 6 months if they don't become a successful candidate. But from a supplier perspective, if you have kind of personal details of your suppliers, you might keep that for 6 years after the contracts come to an end in case there are any kind of contractual disputes or potential future claims. So it's again looking at the different personal data that you have and establishing how long you need to keep it, and making sure that you have a documented policy in place that lets people across the business know and lets individuals know how long you're going to be keeping their data and how you'll be destroying it, and how you're making sure that's done in a compliant and secure way as well. So contracts. Looking at the contracts that you have in place with data processors, and also just bearing in mind that where you have kind of suppliers and customers who are potentially sole traders and partnerships, the GDPR expects you to look after personal data relating to individuals and sole traders and partnerships to the same standard, so sole traders and partners are treated the same way as individuals, and also where you have business data, so personal data of people's sort of work email addresses tends to, so for example my email address is claire.stockill@irwinmitchell.com. That is my business email address, but it does contain my personal data, so it doesn't fall outside the realms of GDPR. Where you have kind of corporate email addresses that contain people's names, it will also fall under the realms of GDPR. And the ICO takes a more pragmatic view when it's business data, but you shouldn't think that just because something's business data it falls outside of the realms of GDPR, it still will be covered and you need to be compliant. So where you have any data sharing arrangements in place, so examples, for example, of things like payroll support that's outsourced, IT support that's outsourced, you should have a contract in place that governs how those parties are using personal data on your behalf, what they're doing and how they're keeping it secure. GDPR makes this a legal obligation, so data controllers and data processors must have a written contract in place. So where you don't have these contracts in place, you need to make sure you're putting them in place. Where you do have them in place, GDPR also sets out a list of the things that the data processor clauses need to say. So it's things like the data processor can't do anything that you haven't kind of instructed them to do. They can't transfer data outside the UK or the EEA without your consent. If they become aware of any kind of data breach in their systems, they need to tell you as soon as possible. So again, it's a long list of information that your contracts need to contain, and it's likely that they don't contain that now. So what we're advising clients to do is think about if they have standard form contracts that they're sending out to customers and suppliers and that kind of thing, having 2-tier clauses in place. So that will be where the current data processor clauses will be Data Protection Act compliant, and then they'll be replaced by a second set of clauses that are GDPR compliant from when GDPR comes into force. And also looking at varying the contracts that you have with third parties, so sending out kind of variation letters, variation documents to make sure the contracts that you have in place are GDPR compliant. So staff training is one of the key things to think about when it comes to GDPR compliance, because it's a really good way to demonstrate to the ICO that you take your data protection obligations very seriously and that you're making staff aware of GDPR and what it means and how it's going to impact on the business and what can happen if things go wrong. And tailoring that staff to the right level of people within the business who, say for example, the finance department might have more access to a lot more kind of financially sensitive information about people, where if there was a breach of that data, then it could have a lot more of a kind of negative impact on the business and its customers, then, for example, if the marketing database of kind of business email addresses was leaked. So it's thinking about the people across the business who have the most kind of access to personal data and deciding whether or not kind of who needs the most kind of in-depth training to do with GDPR. And making sure, again, that you document your training, so that's part of your accountability requirements, so having some documented training policies in place, making sure you're aware of who across the business has had training and who hasn't, and when you're going to kind of refresh training whenever you think that's necessary across the business, and again, having that written accountable document in place to demonstrate compliance. But one of the other things to think about is appointing a data protection officer. So that's not compulsory under the Data Protection Act in this country, but GDPR makes it compulsory in certain circumstances. So not all businesses do need to appoint one, but I've set out on the slide there when they will. So where they're a public authority, where the nature of the processing that they're carrying out requires regular and systematic monitoring of people on a large scale, or where they're doing large-scale kind of processing of sensitive personal data. The wording in the GDPR, because it is an EU law, is quite kind of, it's not entirely clear, so we are relying on guidance from the ICO to explain things in more detail, but it's thinking about the size of your business and your customer base. If you're an organisation that kind of has 1,000 customers, you're more likely to need a DPO than someone who has 50 customers, for example. So it's just looking at your organisation and deciding whether or not you think you meet one of these criteria. And even if you don't, you can't be wrong for appointing a data protection officer, but there are further obligations that flow from that in terms of who the data protection officer can be. So they need to be independent, they need to be able to kind of report to the highest level of management within the business, they need to be involved in all your decisions about personal data, and they need to be advising on your data protection obligations. So if you don't think you need to appoint a data protection officer, you might still think about having someone in the business who's sort of the first point of contact for data protection. So they don't have the formal kind of title of a data protection officer, but they might be kind of data protection supervisor, or kind of the person within the business that knows a bit more about data protection and can be the first point of contact for any customer queries or queries from within the business, and they might just know how to deal with it, or whether or not you need to go out and get legal advice and that kind of thing. So again, it would be something to think about in terms of having that person with that responsibility within the business, even if they're not a formal data protection officer. Another one of the areas to think about is these privacy impact assessments. So again, under the Data Protection Act, it's not compulsory to carry out privacy impact assessments. What that means is it's a process where you want to put in place some sort of new kind of processing of personal data. So whether that's a new IT system that you're going to put all your staff data on, for example, or all your financial data on, and you want to kind of input that into your business system, you might think about carrying out a privacy impact assessment now. Under GDPR, if you're going to do any of the things I've set out on the slide there, so any automated processing, so any decisions that you're making about individuals where it's not kind of based on a human interaction, so credit reference checks and that kind of thing, large-scale processing of special categories of personal data, and any systematic monitoring of a publicly accessible area on a large scale, so large-scale monitoring of your website for users' behaviour if it's collecting IP addresses and that kind of thing. You should think about carrying out a privacy impact assessment where the processing that you want to carry out is likely to result in a high risk to the rights and freedoms of individuals. And this would just be, again, another documented process where you set out what you want to do in terms of the new processing that you want to carry out, what the risks are to the people involved if something goes wrong, if data's leaked, could there be a risk of identity fraud, that kind of thing, whether or not, what you're doing to address those risks, how you're making sure that the new system is GDPR compliant, so you're telling people what you're doing with their personal data, and again, setting all that out in a documented process whereby you kind of come to a conclusion that what you're doing is GDPR compliant, and making sure that if anything happens and something goes wrong, you've got that document where you said, we did think about this and this is what we're doing to address the risks. So under GDPR, individuals also have kind of enhanced rights over their personal data. One of the key areas is subject to access. So this might be something that the business has kind of come across before. We typically see it in an employment context, so where an employee leaves the business and they might be unhappy with the way they left and they put in what's called a subject access request, because individuals have a right to have copies of all the personal data that you have about them. So whether or not they're trying to kind of dig through the emails that you have and whether or not there's anything contained in those emails that they could potentially carry on through to an employment claim against you, that's typically where we help clients with them. So what it means is that individuals can write to any organisation that's a data controller and say, I want you to tell me if you're processing any personal data about me, and I want you to give me copies of that personal data. So under the Data Protection Act now, you have 40 days to respond to a subject access request, and you can charge up to £10. Under GDPR, you'll have 1 month from the date you receive it to respond, and you won't be able to charge a fee for doing so. So I think the key thing to think about is having a procedure in place to be able to spot these things, because they don't have to be titled subject access request, and there's no kind of formality requirement other than they have to be in writing. So it's things like the ICO has talked about businesses monitoring their social media pages, because somebody might make a request over Facebook or Twitter, that kind of thing. Making sure if you do receive one, it's escalated to the right level in the business of who can make a decision about whether or not you need legal advice, whether or not you can withhold anything from subject access, for example, if it's legally privileged or if it's kind of sensitive information about the business management. So just having someone, making sure staff are aware of how to deal with one if it comes in, and making sure you meet the deadlines when it does. The right to be forgotten is one of the things that people hear a lot about in terms of GDPR. So it's where individuals have the right to ask organisations to delete all the personal data that they have about them. The thing with the right to be forgotten is it's a lot more kind of narrowly interpreted than people necessarily think. So it does, for example, it doesn't allow people to write to an organisation that they potentially owe money to, for example, and say, I've got the right to be forgotten, I want you to delete everything that you have about me. They can't do that. So I've put on the slide where people can rely on the right to be forgotten. So that's where your use of their personal data is no longer necessary. So that hopefully feeds back into your data audit process and your data retention process, that you're not keeping personal data when you no longer need it. So it also applies where you are relying on consent for processing personal data and you have no other legal basis for using it, and the person then withdraws that consent. So that again goes back to your data audit and making sure you're positioning yourself correctly in terms of how you're using personal data, and don't rely on consent where you have another legal basis to use it, because it could trigger the right to be forgotten. Individuals have the right to object to kind of direct marketing and your legitimate interests. So they might say, I don't want to receive any kind of direct marketing communications, I want you to delete me from your systems. Otherwise, where you're unlawfully processing personal data or where you're required to delete personal data to comply with your legal obligations. So it is quite narrow, and it doesn't mean that any individual can write to an organisation and ask them to delete personal data. It's generally not the case, so it has to be in one of these circumstances. So what we're advising clients to do is, if they think this is something that will happen a lot and people will write to them and ask, they thinking they've got the right to be forgotten, is potentially just have a template response, which is just a standard letter that says, we understand you are exercising right to be forgotten, but actually we're not processing your personal data on the basis of consent, we're processing it on the lawful basis that we need it to comply with our legal obligations or because we have a contract in place with you, so you actually don't have the right to be forgotten in these circumstances. Dealing with data breach, again, is one of the things to think about, and having a policy in place, again, for dealing with this. So currently under the Data Protection Act, you're not legally required to notify the ICO if you have a data breach. The ICO has guidance where they say, if a breach is quite serious, you should think about, seriously think about talking to us about it and telling us about it, but it's not a legal obligation. But under GDPR, notification of data breaches will become compulsory unless they're unlikely to result in a risk to the rights and freedoms of individuals. So you need to be having a policy and a procedure in place where you can spot data breaches when they happen, and making sure staff are aware of what to do if they do spot one, because they need to be kind of escalating it to the right person within the business who can make a decision about whether there is this risk to people's rights and freedoms. And where you think that is the case, you need to be notifying the ICO within 72 hours of discovering the data breach. So it's a very short deadline, and if you don't meet that deadline, you need to then be telling the ICO as soon as possible and explaining why you missed the deadline. So again, it's having a procedure in place really to deal with data breach, and to make sure that you're notifying the ICO within the right time frame if you think you need to. There are also circumstances where you need to notify the individuals who have been affected by the data breach, so that's where there's a high risk to their rights and freedoms. So that could be potentially where you are leaking people's, there's been a leak of people's bank details, for example, and that could result in a risk of identity theft or fraud. So you need to be notifying individuals as soon as possible as well, and therefore your policy needs to cover off whether or not you're identifying the notifying the ICO, and then whether or not you're notifying individuals as well. I've set out on the slide that there are some exceptions to where you don't need to notify individuals about a data breach. So that's where you have technological and organisational protection measures. So that could be things like if someone leaves a laptop on the train that contains people's personal data, but your organisation has a policy where your laptops are kind of encrypted and everything's password protected, so the person who got that laptop wouldn't be able to access your systems with personal data on them. You'd have some sort of organisational kind of security measure in place, and you wouldn't necessarily need to notify individuals if you thought there was no risk to them. Where you've taken some action to eliminate the high risk, so that could be where, I don't know, for example, you're sending archive boxes with people's personal information in them to archive, and one of the boxes falls off the lorry, but they notice straight away and go and pick it up, and no one's interfered with it, and therefore the high risk has been eliminated. Or where it would be a disproportionate effort, so potentially if you have a leak of your marketing database and kind of 1,000 email addresses are leaked, for example, it might be a disproportionate effort for you to contact each of those individuals, but the ICO is clear that this isn't kind of an exception that should be relied upon lightly, so they would still expect you to take some action to let people know what's happened. So whether or not that's putting something on your website or sending out an email, for example, to say what's happened and saying what you're doing to tackle the risk and making sure that it doesn't happen again. So I've briefly touched on this, but fines for GDPR compliance are set in 2 tiers. So the first tier fines are for administrative breaches, so that includes things like not complying with the data protection officer obligations correctly. So fines for those types of breaches can be up to 10 million euros or 2% of annual global turnover. And then for other breaches of GDPR, so this is things like getting consent wrong or not having lawful reasons for using personal data, fines of up to 20 million euros or 4% of annual global turnover. And we are kind of seeing more of a culture of issuing bigger fines across the EU. So we've recently seen in Italy the highest ever fine for failure to comply with Italian data protection law, I think 11 million euros. So it just kind of demonstrates the idea behind GDPR in terms of making sure organisations are taking their data protection obligations seriously. They're not, making sure that individuals have more control over their personal data, and that when things go wrong, the national authorities are going to have power to issue much bigger fines. So yeah, I think that's it.
The lovely Rob from ESET to talk to us about data protection in response to GDPR.
Morning everybody. You all got another coffee and you're going to need it now. A lot to take in so far, and I do a lot of these kind of events. And as I've just said, that was as good a representation as GDPR as I've seen yet. So please, do base a lot of your decisions on that. What I'm going to spend a little bit of time doing is looking at how you can use technology to help yourselves get somewhere towards GDPR compliance, and just some of the considerations you should make over data breaches as well, and how they can occur. And we'll look at some examples of where people have fallen foul of data breaches in the past, just to dispel the myth that it'll blow over and all this sort of thing. Just quickly, we've been working with Apex for many years now, so I'm guessing some of you are already Apex customers. You are maybe using our antivirus already? Okay, that's good. We are increasingly presenting ourselves as a security solution specialist. So everybody knows us for AV, but there's so much more to it, and I would say 90% of my time now is spent talking to not just end users but our partners as well about encryption software. It's a very hot topic. It's a very popular technology, particularly in terms of GDPR, and hopefully you're going to see how useful it can be to as we go along. So just quickly, just to follow on, bit of guidance from the ICO based on GDPR. The Information Commission will consider penalties where data loss has occurred, encryption software has not been used to protect the data. They recommend portable and mobile devices should be protected using approved encryption software, and you should ensure compliance with recognised standards. For anybody who is really into that kind of thing, it's FIPS 140-2. I'm happy to say that the product we're going to look at today, which is ESET endpoint encryption, is FIPS 140-2. Well, this is kind of a key slide because you've got it kind of straight from the horse's mouth, and there is a quote further on in the presentation, that this is something that will help you when it comes to avoiding data breaches really and preventing them. So, question to the floor, what is the biggest threat to your data? Would anybody like to hazard a guess?
Your employees.
Who said that? What did he say specifically, your employees?
Yeah.
That's even better than I could have asked for. People. It's really encouraging that I'm getting that answer because 12 months ago I'd have people going mobile phones, it's this, it's that. It's, you know, and it is absolutely people. It's unfortunate we say that, but a statistic I heard last summer, so nearly 18 months ago, was that something like 75% of data breaches were unintentional and human error. Now, I should imagine that's probably grown a little bit as well, particularly as we've seen ransomware on the rise and things like that. And that is a data breach that was unintentional and human error. Nobody meant to click that link. You know, they weren't doing anything they thought was wrong, things like that. What we're talking about today makes sense to all of us that are delivering the information. It probably made a little bit of sense to you guys before you got here. It's going to make even more sense when you go, but consider your colleagues and your staff and what they're thinking about it, and they're not coming in and thinking about this on a day-to-day basis, and why would they be? So where do data breaches occur? So I'm thinking of specific areas, and we're talking about technology, obviously, in the case of us. Would anybody like to hazard a guess at what the most obvious one is? Email's one of them, yeah, and we'll cover that.
Remote usage.
What, in terms of VPN?
Yeah.
It's a good one. I haven't got that on the list, and there is a reason why, and I'll explain that. But there is a the first one that panics anybody as an individual if it happens to you.
Stolen equipment.
Yeah, lost or stolen equipment, absolutely. We always go on about if you leave your laptop on a train. I've never actually met anybody that's happened to, but apparently it happens all the time. I'll tell a lie actually, I did a presentation in Durham a few weeks ago, and I asked that, and a guy at the back put his hand up, and he actually worked for the IT company I was presenting for, so I didn't bode well for them. So if a device is lost, stolen or compromised, if you do leave it on a train, if somebody steals it out the back of your car, if somebody steals it from your office, something like that, what have they got access to? How easy is it going to be to crack your Windows password on that device? And I get people saying, well, it's fine because we don't save anything to the desktop. We have a policy of no files on the desktop. Well, that's fantastic. But if they get through your Windows password, what else can they get? So VPN, because it's more than likely going to be the same as your Windows password. We're talking about cloud storage and things like that. Have you got OneDrive? Have you got Dropbox? Well, we save everything to there. Well, so it's probably only a double click away because we all want everything to be nice and easy. And even if you have got a policy of not saving things to the desktop, I'm pretty much guarantee that some of your staff are going to do it because it's easier that way. Or they've done it unintentionally as well. Well, I'm going to need that file, and what if I can't get online and get on the server? So I'm just going to put it on my desktop. And that file could be a list of your customers, it could be a marketing database, it could be a payroll database. Some of the things I see when I'm talking to end users that people do that are hugely risky in terms of data breaches, you just won't believe, and it's probably happening amongst your companies as well. So that's a specific device, and one that you do have a little bit of control over. Sure, you might turn around and say, well, we'll just withdraw. If we know it's been stolen or lost, we will withdraw the Windows login and things. But what about other pieces of technology that you don't have any control over? Anybody like to hazard a guess what I'm talking about there? It has been mentioned actually in the first.
USBs.
Yep, absolutely. When data is transferred to USB or optical media. Now, I'm sure some of you here use those, be it for backups, be it for transferring data, taking data to work on in another office or at home or something like that. Sending it in the post as well. It's a very common way of people sending data out to end users. You have no control over that. If somebody drops a USB and it's unprotected, anybody's got access to it, and we'll have a look at an example of that some of you probably saw in the news fairly recently. Somebody's already said email, that's number 4. There is another one that doesn't relate specifically to a device, but the use thereof, and in terms of how people access that data. What is, in terms of like bring your own device? It's a good point, and it is a really, really tricky area when it comes to IT security and things, because obviously imagine some people turn around and say, well, I don't even putting that on my mobile phone and things, but you're quite right, it is a consideration you should make. And it could kind of lead into to the point, because you're more likely to have more data relating to yourself on a personal device, and that's unauthorised access. We're talking a little bit about the enemy within here, if I'm being honest. I was at a college a couple of weeks ago, and when we started to talk about this, there were about 8 people there who were all like heads of department and bursars and things like this, you know. And when we started to talk about this, several of them just went drip white, and somebody turned around and said, can anybody in this college get access to absolutely anything? And somebody else turned around and went, yes. And they were really, really worried about it. It was just something that had never occurred to them. So what can people access across your network? What have they got access to on your servers? What have they got access to on your own personal device? What could they accidentally do? If you give your device to one of your children, or to do their homework or watch CBeebies, and they accidentally open something they're not meant to see, or delete it, or email it to somebody by accident, or something like that. If they haven't got access to that data, they can't breach it. So consider your permission structure, and I think it is a very important part of GDPR. Not only consider the data you've got and what you maybe need to get rid of, but consider who's got access to the data that you do need to keep, and whether they need access to it as well. And then lastly, email as well. I'm sure we've all done it. I'm going to say hands up who hasn't ever accidentally sent an email to the wrong person. No, you've never done it. That's impressive. It is the digital equivalent of getting your hand stuck in a pillar box. It's just awful when you realise you've done it. You know, and even if it's something really, really innocuous, we all feel a little bit embarrassed by doing it and things like that. But it happens. But not only that, people might be looking to hack into your internet line to get hold of emails, or there may be people at the other end that have got access to those emails that shouldn't have. So consider, you know, whether only the recipient is going to have access to those emails and things as well, and also the data that you are emailing. Again, I saw a company who, I told him about this. I was talking to the end user directly. He put his head in his hands, and I was like, well, what was that? I thought I really offended this guy. I said, are you okay? He said, yeah, this is brilliant. He said, our accounts department constantly email our entire payroll database to each other, and I keep asking them to stop doing it, and now I don't have to. If I can get it encrypted, it's fine, and things like that. But people will do it because they just want an easy life. So, going back to the GDPR, how encryption can help. Encryption has been named by the ICO as one of the appropriate technical and organisational measures that businesses should implement to ensure a level of security adequate to the risk. I think that's a really key point, is adequate to the risk. Think about the risk to your business. Some of you put your hand up and nodded and you said you know about ESET and you use RAV already. You're probably all using RAV in a very similar way, and those of you that aren't using ESET AV, first of all, why? And second of all, you're probably using your AV in a very similar way to other companies that are using that brand of AV. That's not the case when it comes to meeting GDPR compliance and getting the best out of data protection. You're all going to have your data set up in different ways. You're going to have your staff and your colleagues working in different ways on different devices, working from home, working remotely across VPN, using USBs, using digital media, optical media, emailing, having all sorts of different permissions. So consider the risk to your business whenever you're implementing any policy or any technology to do with GDPR. For those that you don't know, encryption is the process of encoding information that, in a way that prevents unauthorised parties from being able to read it. And again, that goes back to unauthorised access, both internally and externally. And again, I can probably mention an example of that. This is from the ICO themselves. In recent years, there have been numerous incidents where personal data has been stolen, lost, or subject to unauthorised access, where encryption software has not been used to protect the data, and regulatory action may be pursued. Straight from the horse's mouth. I'm guessing most people in here use LinkedIn, things like that. Please go and follow the ICO on LinkedIn if you don't already, and have a look at their website. It's brilliant. some of the articles, they published a really good one a couple of weeks ago, like a myth-busting blog on GDPR. These are the guys that are going to be policing this, and at last count they only had something like 18 or 19,000 followers on LinkedIn. You know, Richard Branson's got several million. He's not going to protect you from data breaches and things like that, but you know, there's something like 5.5 million businesses in the UK. The message is getting out there slowly but surely, probably not as quick as people would like, but do go follow them, you'll get some very good practical advice from there. So this is our product, ESET endpoint encryption. For those of you who got our AV, you probably already recognise Andy there. And we're going to have a look at some of the how we can meet some of those data breach points that we made, and then look very briefly at some of the features before we look at some examples of people who've had data breaches in the past. So, big question, what would happen if your data fell into the wrong hands? And what we're going to cover here goes beyond, above and beyond GDPR obligation. To my mind, it's obviously from a legal standpoint, it's hugely important that you protect personal and consumer data. But what about your business data as well? What about price lists and things like that? They might not be personal data, but do you really want that, you know, those things getting into the wrong hands? Your payroll data, your financial data, it might not have anything personal in there, but do you want people knowing, getting hold of that? How would it impact you and things like that? So in terms of GDPR, if you encrypt your data or protect your data sufficiently, you're going to avoid monetary penalties, you're going to meet legal requirements, you're going to protect your staff and consumer data. Big tick in the box for GDPR. Nice and straightforward. It's not going to completely do it for you. I always stop very short of saying, if you encrypt your data, you are GDPR compliant. And I hope the previous presentation showed you that. So much of it is policy based as well. But then consider some other areas. Avoiding bad press. Reputation. I'm sure some of you involved in trade organisations as well that are relevant to your industry. Local networking groups. You might have associations with local business magazines or business publications. What would happen, or how would it affect your business if it got out there that you had a data breach? You didn't have the right security in place and things like that. And again, we'll have a look at an example where that's impacted a very large organisation in the past. Protecting your customer data, whether they're an individual or a business or not, I think the very least they can expect is that their data is protected. It's not going to get out there. Somebody gets all of your database, starts ringing your customer database and saying, we can sell you a bag of cement for £9, we see you've been paying £10. You'd like to think they're not going to do that, but at the same time, they're going to ring you and say, how come I'm getting offered products from another company cheaper, and they know exactly what I've been paying and they know exactly how often I buy it and things like that. It's not going to bode well for you, and that's when you start to lose business, you start to lose customers. Protecting your financial data, as I mentioned, I'm sure you don't want anybody else knowing how much money or how little money you might have. So make sure you protect that as well. Protect your corporate data and protect your intellectual property. What have you got that's unique to your business that somebody else might want? And at that point, we're maybe not talking about mistakes, we're maybe talking about specific attacks. Is somebody looking to get hold of your data because you've got something that they want? Something that's unique to you, patented or otherwise. Think about protecting that and making sure that that's avoided. And there is always going to be linkings there. You know, if you lose something that's intellectual property, 90% of the problem is that, or has it got somebody's personal information on there as well? Be it through email address or the customer data. So these are all things to consider. Another big tick in the box. So we'll have a look at how to protect some of those examples we looked at. So lost and stolen devices. This is the nice, easy, straightforward one. Full disk encryption. And this kind of goes back to an example I think you were making, where if you have got an encrypted device and you do have a data breach that's lost or stolen, then nobody can get access to that data. Sure, report it to the ICO, we can prove it was encrypted, we're essentially managing it, nobody can get access to it. We've withdrawn the encryption key, where we go. If they can't get on the disk, onto the laptop or the PC itself, they can't get at anything. So again, we get people saying, well, it's no good to us because we don't have anything on the disk. But what can they get access to? Can they get to your VPN? Can they get to your cloud storage? Can they get to your CRM system and things like that? You know, the only time you might not look at that is if you're using thin client, where there is literally no disk to encrypt and things like that, but obviously that tends to be internal. Please don't think as well that it's just laptops, and we'll see an example of that. don't think that you know, well, they're all out of the office, we protect everything in the office. What if somebody breaks it? You know, and things like that. So it's as straightforward as that. Protect your data, protect any access to anything from that device by encrypting the data. How to protect against loss or theft of removable media encryption. Put yourself in a position where the minute somebody puts a USB device into one of your into an endpoint, a laptop or a PC, it encrypts. And manage it centrally and force that so that people don't go, oh, I forgot to encrypt that. Things like that. Think about it from the flip side as well. We're talking here about people legitimately using your data. What if somebody's leaving and you don't know they're leaving and they want to take that data off site because they're like, oh, I'll take that database because I've told my new employer I'm going to bring all my customers across with me and things like that. If you've got that data encrypted, the minute they take it off, it's absolutely useless to them when they go put it in another device, unless they've got the requisite software at the other end. So they take it to their new employer and go, see, I've got it, plug it in, blank. Shows some of the storage has been used, they've got absolutely no access to it because they haven't got ESET endpoint encryption to access it. So protect yourself there, but you're also protecting yourself if somebody loses it, things like that. How to protect against unauthorized access to data. File and folder encryption. Within our product we have a patented key sharing technology, which means you can restrict access at any time and change those policies at any time to make sure you've got a very robust permission structure within your network to say they've got access to that, they've got access to that, they haven't. I'm sure you can have access to that for 20 minutes, but I'm not letting you copy it. One of the big things we see is you protect everything and then somebody says, I really need a copy of that document, can you email it to me? Yeah, sure you can. Then that other person's not protecting it. So the protection you put out in the first place is just completely redundant because how many times have they replicated it? Where are they saving it? Who else have they sent it to? So not only restrict access to it directly, but restrict access to it on a granular individual basis. Sure, I'll let you have a look at it, but it's read-only, you're not copying and pasting it, I don't need to email it to you, things like that. And just really get the most out of your security policy in that respect. And then finally, unauthorised access to email and email hacks, email encryption, simple as that. Meet the requirement. If you're a recruitment consultancy, you know, sending CVs or receiving CVs or sending job offers, encrypt them. If you're sending payroll data, maybe even pay slips, things like that, encrypt them. Make it nice and straightforward and meet that obligation. It not only means that you're not getting hacked between point A and point B, but only the recipient is going to have access to the email because only they are going to get the password that you're going to send them to have access to that. I've just put this up, this is part of our data sheet, and obviously you can all have a copy of this as well. But one of the big things I get is, oh God, this is new technology and everybody's going to hate it, and my IT manager is going to hate me because they're going to be getting constant calls on how to use it, I can't unencrypt this and that. Our product has been specifically developed over many, many years to have zero user interaction. The only extra step you'll ever see is within email because you have to choose to encrypt the email. USB encryption is automated, you can link it in with Windows login, so the minute they put a key in, an encryption key to start the process, it'll log them straight into Windows as well. So it's a huge, huge bonus. From my point of view, we've mentioned education and we've mentioned providing a level of security. And I go to a lot of expos and things like that, and people come to me and they go, we're going to leave everything absolutely open, but we are going to educate. We're going to make sure that everybody knows what they need to do. Absolutely the right thing to do, but they will still make mistakes. But by the very same token, if you lock everything down, you're just going to slow your workforce down. They're constantly going to ring in IT saying, can I have access to this? Can you unencrypt this for me? Can you let me have access to USB drive so I can copy something to USB? Can I have this folder? Can I have this? Can I have that? Find a middle ground. Let your end users have the smooth, hassle-free experience on a day-to-day basis that they're used to, but give yourself that level of protection at the same time. And ESET endpoint encryption has been developed specifically to do that and make your lives easier, prevent data breaches, but not impact on a day-to-day basis what your end users are doing. Most people tend to go, I've just put this up here purely because there might be some people that will go for standard edition. Our Pro version is the only one that's got full disk encryption in it. If you are in a position where you have thin client technology, diskless technology, then absolutely go for the standard edition because you don't, if there's no disk there, you can't encrypt it. But you still might need, you're still going to need email encryption. You're still going to need to think about file and folder encryption and things like that as well. So those, and feel free to mix those products up as well if you need to do that. And I put this one in here as well, just to talk about the remote central management. It is completely centrally managed. If somebody leaves your company and they've got an encrypted laptop and you don't want them to have access to it, you put them on garden leave or something like that. It's a very extreme example. You can withdraw their encryption key centrally. Similarly, if somebody forgets theirs and they're 300 miles away, you can issue them a new encryption key. So it's fully manageable. It's not slowing people down, things like that. All the policies you want to push out there as well for any type of encryption, you can do that essentially. So we'll go through some examples of where people fall foul. I often find this is the bit where it kind of resonates with people a bit more because they're real-time examples. But this is a fairly recent one, and I got this directly from the ICO website. It was a charity, some of you might have seen it, and one of their members of staff, I thought it was a volunteer or what, I'd sent 11 emails from his work account earlier this year that contained sensitive personal data on 183 people, 3 of whom were children. And the personal data included names, dates of birth, telephone numbers, and medical information. So you can see the split between ordinary data and sensitive data as well. Further investigation showed he'd done it again previous summer. I don't know why this person had done it. There's every chance he was doing it legitimately. He wanted to do some work at home and didn't realise that what he was doing was potentially dangerous, not only for his organisation but for the individuals concerned. And this is the consideration to make. Somebody might legitimately make a mistake. They might think they're doing the right thing when in fact they're putting your business at risk and putting them at risk of a fine. I can see you all trying to check it from the back. We'll make sure you get a copy of this, don't worry. Did we see this one a couple of weeks ago, Heathrow? I like this one a lot. If you want to scribble this down, because it's not on here, we have a website that we use for our blogging called welivesecurity.com. And this is lifted from a blog that we did there on 2-3 weeks ago. If you go onto the website, you can put your email address in and you'll get, I think it's every Friday about dinner time, just when everybody's winding down and we just want to read newsletters. We'll send you out a newsletter with some details of trends within the industry and just things, interesting things to consider. The USB was found, I think, allegedly by, I think it was a homeless person that found it. An interesting thing for me is that they went straight to the newspapers with it. So we asked a lot of questions about this one because, you know, was it deliberate? Was somebody really trying to make an example of Heathrow? Was it somebody with a grudge? As is often the case, data breaches often happen from people that have got a bit of a grudge. Another one we saw, I haven't got this in the slideshow, but it came up in the news again recently. And this goes back to file access and data access, who shouldn't have it. But a very large supermarket, not far from where I'm from, had a massive data breach about 3 years ago, where a certain individual who had been disciplined and shouldn't have had access to a lot of data, but did, went and got all their payroll data and published it online, so that all the staff and anybody else wanted to see it could see what everybody was getting paid. Now, that particular individual, if I remember rightly, is on an extended holiday at the moment. But very recently, this is 3 years down the line, somewhere in the region of 5,000 current and ex-employees of this particular supermarket are collectively suing them. So it's, you look at the individual on here, did they have access to it and legitimately just dropped it on a grass verge? Or did they have access to the data and just said, you know what, I need to show somebody that this is a problem? Because I think I don't know if it's in there, but I think it had details of the Queen's movements when she went to and from Heathrow. So how she got in, how she got out and things like that. Which I'm sure isn't that exciting, but it could be a risk. But you can just see how that caused the problem. I don't know what the outcome is, it could be quite a while before we find out, but needless to say, Heathrow are pretty embarrassed about that, I should imagine, but it could have further repercussions from further down the line. I dread to think what the fine would have been like if we were already past the threshold of GDPR. This one was a little while ago. NHS Surrey were fined £200,000 by the ICO. More than 3,000 patient records were found on a second-hand computer, and they were alerted to the problem by a member of the public. I've absolutely no idea how that happened, but I could come up with about 20 different scenarios. It may be that they just didn't think to decommission the PCs. It may be that they decommissioned a load and forgot to do one. It may be they sold the PCs to a company who said they were going to decommission them. I very much doubt they did that deliberately. But it was a huge, huge error of judgment by whoever made the decision to allow that to happen. Steve Eckersley, he's brilliant, is Steve. He doesn't pull any punches, he doesn't care who you are. The faxes breach are truly shocking, and it's one of the most seriously ISO's witnessed, and the penalty reflects the disturbing circumstances of the case. I'll just go back to that one actually. I think paper records were talked about earlier. There's another one I haven't got in here, but I just think he's brilliant. And I heard, some of this might have been lost in translation, but I heard a story about somebody had gone into a second-hand shop, a junk shop, and they saw one of those old-style, clanky filing cabinets. And they said, oh, brilliant, have you got a key for this? I really need one of those. He said, yeah, I've got a key. Opened it up, pulled open the drawers, absolutely full of files. And it was, I think it was a local council or something along those lines, had got rid of them and, oh, we don't need those anymore, we've digitised all that. And they just took them down to a second-hand shop. Now, when I read that, there was one thing that jumped out at me straight away that I thought was very, very strange. Would anybody care to guess what it was? Exactly. Did they not notice it weighed a ton when they were moving it? It was, you know, paper and cardboard is very, very heavy. Those cabinets are not that heavy when they're empty. But what a huge error of judgment. And I don't know whether they got fined. I should imagine they did, but it's paper records. You know, they were duty bound to protect those as well. This is a good example of why people should consider encryption throughout their business and not just with remote users. More often than not, I see people going, yeah, we're just going to do the laptops for now. You could replace the word laptops with PCs there. And I seem to remember when I read this properly, it was a guy who was on holiday or was on leave or something like that, and he locked his laptop in the drawer, just because, I don't know if it's a typical British thing, but we've always got that you never know mentality about things, which is why we've all got a drawer full of screws and batteries and bits of string that we're never going to use, but you never know, and things like that. And we keep the numbers of people we haven't spoken to for 20 years in our phone because you never know. And he said, can you keep hold of the key for me just in case you need my laptop? He said, yeah, no problem. And his laptop was still on the desk. Somebody broke in, stole this guy's laptop off his desk, opened the drawer. Oh, there's a key there. Oh, it fits that drawer there. Fantastic, another laptop. Double whammy, off they went. Again, even though the laptops weren't encrypted and they've never been recovered, probably just got sold down the pub. But it could have been a targeted attack. I don't know what department it was. It could have been somebody that was after their data, had a grudge or something like that. And these are the things you need to be aware of. High-profile examples of how not to comply. Who's a TalkTalk customer? Who's going to admit to being a TalkTalk customer? Who has been a TalkTalk customer? Why are you not a TalkTalk customer anymore? Everybody, nobody ever says because they got hacked every discuss because they were rubbish. I've never been a customer there, so I can't say either way. Did anybody see this one a couple of years ago? This was probably, I think it was before WannaCry, it was the most high-profile data security thing, it's certainly in this country that we've seen. It was a couple of years ago now, I think, coming up for a couple of years ago, and they only got fined at the end of last year. And they actually got fined £400,000, which I understand is the highest fine that's been levied in this country. So it's interesting to point out that nobody's yet been fined £500,000. And we do get a lot of people going, ooh, it's just another money-making exercise. You know, these are not council parking fines and things like that. I think there's only something like 16 fines been levied in the last 12 months by the ICO. Hundreds more mitigations and things like that, and advisory sort of penalties been put in place, but only 16 fines. That is rising, and it will rise even more because obviously people are going to be more at risk of having a data breach as of next year because they haven't got stuff in place already. Yeah, the CEO of TalkTalk, of Dino Harding there, was quite arrogant about it and said, yeah, we're not legally required to encrypt it and protect it and stuff, and the ICO said they were and fined them. The person who did it, did anybody see in the news who it was that had done it? It was a 15-year-old lad. I think he was so young he couldn't even appear in court, and when they said, why did you do it, he said, I just wanted to show my mates I could. That was it. And I did a similar presentation a couple of weeks ago up in Cumbria, And there was a lady sat there shaking her head, and I said, "Are you all right?" She said, "I work with young people, and they come into our facility. I think she's with charity, and they do coding." And she says it is terrifying what they're able to do, and what they want to do, and things like that. And that's all he was doing. He just wanted to show off to his mates they could do it. I understand TalkTalk lost something like 110,000 customers very, very quickly on the back of this, and obviously then didn't get many people signing up for their services. I don't know if any of you listen to commercial radio, but there are a lot of TalkTalk adverts out there at the moment. Their internet is very cheap, and I can imagine there are a lot of people sat there in their cars going, "Oh, TalkTalk, they're terrible, they got hacked. £7 a month is £7 a month, so whatever." So they're obviously there trying to win a lot of business back at the moment and things like that, and you know, it must have been pretty difficult for them. I did hear somewhere that a reasonable estimate as to what it's cost TalkTalk is upwards of £50 million. You know, in litigation, bad press, lost business, both existing and new, and things like that. So these are the considerations to make. I have genuinely seen companies who turn around and said it's going to cost us 600 grand to encrypt, so I think we'll just take the risk, and we'll only lose 500 grand. It just doesn't work like that. I think the last slide goes on to that. There you go. £100,000 fine is substantial, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. And this was from a website called Information Age. 11% drop in share price. Sorry, 101,000, not 110. I did them a disservice there. Existing customers and potential future ones. And TalkTalk calculated the breach was to be like 80 million rather than 50. Sorry. So these are the things to consider. If you have a data breach, don't think just about the fine. A fine is a finite number. It can cut your cloth accordingly, I'm sure. Although I can imagine it will finish some businesses off. But just think about the long-term repercussions of it as well. So just to recap, this is just a useful slide on some of the objectives you might be looking to consider within in terms of data protection and how ESET endpoint encryption, it used to be called DESLAT, that's why it says that up there, why ESET endpoint encryption can help. So securing data at rest within your organisations. All commercial versions include file folder and removable media encryption and full disk encryption as standard to secure data at the endpoint. So within your business, if people are moving data about or accessing data, you know that they're only accessing the right data, and any data they're moving about is protected. Securing data in transit, you've got full disk and removable media encryption for USB drives and optical media to secure data on the move. Somebody takes a laptop home, it's secure if it gets stolen, if they lose it. Somebody drops a USB key, it's secure. Somebody has, God forbid, your backup drive is lost or stolen, it's secure. Doesn't matter even if they take the disk out and put it into another caddy, they can't get access to it. Securing data for mobile and home working practices. Commercially, this is a big thing for you guys. It's a user-based product, it's not device-based in the same way our antiviruses. So you might have 40 members of staff working on 60 different devices, you would only need to purchase 40 user copies. You can extend it to a home user. So you might say, it's 5:30, I need to get home, but I need to do this work over the weekend or later on tonight. So I'm going to download this data onto USB, it automatically encrypts. You turn your PC off at work, that's encrypted, that's safe. You then go home, all the way home that data is encrypted and it's secure. You go onto your PC at home, that's encrypted as well, under the same user account. You plug your USB in, you start using the data straight from there. At every single point that data is protected, and you're meeting your obligation, certainly if you carry on any personal data, but you're also protecting your business. Securing transfer of data between locations. All versions have got an Outlook plugin, we've got clipboard encryption as well. A little example we saw of that was fairly recently, I think it was a county council up in the northeast, and somebody was tasked with sending an email out inviting everybody to some sort of social event during the summer. I don't know how many people, it was many, let's just say that. My guess is they didn't know what was on their clipboard, and they actually pasted onto the email a list of children that were in care and sent it out to everybody. And it caused them all sorts of problems. I think that one I remember reading on the ICO website several months ago. They got a fine for that one. Email could have been encrypted. You could argue you wouldn't necessarily encrypt an email that was a social thing. But perhaps if they've been using clipboard encryption, they may have been able to prevent themselves from doing that as well. Block and limit access to certain data. We've got unique patented key sharing technology, makes it simple to deploy and manage complex multi-layered teams and work groups. Make it work for you guys. The whole point of the product is that it fits around your business as far as is humanly possible. Technologically possible, should I say. Allow access to secure data when requested. The enterprise server is designed for remote user management via a secure internet connection, and it can centrally distribute and withdraw keys rapidly. It's FIPS 140-2, and it uses reliable, proven, secure, industry standard encryption algorithm methods. So you know it's going to tick the box in terms of it being the right type of encryption. And you've got secure destruction of redundant data. So if you are destroying all that data that you probably shouldn't have or no longer need, but you never know, if you are destroying that, then you can use the desktop shredder tool. I did see as well at Sports, and this was brilliant. It was a legal company who gave a very similar talk on GDPR as we've seen this morning, and they tasked their staff, and I'm sure this will answer some of you guys as well, they tasked their staff with clearing down their my documents. They said, you've got till this day, and then we're going to look at it all, and we want to see what you've got rid of. And they were great, and every single person did, maybe 60 people in the company, something like that. And when they went on the deadline day, the company My Documents was bigger. They'd managed not to get rid of everything, they'd just gone, oh, I might need that, well, I'll put that in there actually, you know, things like that. But yeah, you can use that to make sure that you're destroying the data securely. And that is pretty much it, so thanks very much for listening. Ignore that bit because I understand we're going to have a bit of a panel at the end for any questions. I'm going to be about after the event as well, so if you, I appreciate some of the questions you might have relate directly to your own business or your own circumstances. Please come and find me, I'll be the one with the ESET t-shirt. And we can have a chat and help you where we can. Thanks again, Peter.
Thank you.
Hi, for those of you who don't know, I am Nathaniel and I'm Head of Backups and Security at Apex Computing. So I'm here to give you a brief look into some of the ways that Apex can help you improve the security of your network, as well as tell you about some of the services and features we can implement in your company. So there's going to be several of us around after the Q&A session, so feel free to come and talk to any of us about any of the services or ask us about anything else raised today, and we'll be more than happy to assist you where we can. So, starting with the basics. Password policies. This is often discounted as something that doesn't need to be done, but this is far from the truth. A solid password policy enforced across your company is the foundation to all internal security. We can create a policy that applies across your whole domain and everyone will be required to follow it. We recommend that passwords are changed regularly, but no more than every 3 months. When passwords are forced to be changed more often, people are more likely to forget them, leading to them writing them down on post-it notes, which negates the whole point of having a password in the first place. We would also recommend that the passwords are not shorter than 8 characters. This increases the entropy of the password, and when combined with the complexity requirements, means that you're on a good foundation to move forward. All the complexity requirements mean is that you're simply required to have any 3 of the 4 options in your passwords. That's an uppercase, a lowercase, a number, and a special character. The password history simply means that users cannot reuse the same password within a given time frame. So we generally set this as 5, keeping 5 passwords secure. So basically this means that within the same year, the users can't reuse the same password. Again, it all comes down to that security thing of making sure that it's different enough. And finally, the most important one, don't share your passwords. A password should be unique to every single user. If you've got a global password that applies across the whole domain, there's no point in having a password. If you share your password with someone else, there's no point having that password. As soon as someone else knows that password, it's not secure anymore. These may seem obvious, and some of you will already have these things in place, but you would be surprised how many security breaches are caused by insufficient password policies. It's worth noting as well that, going back to Dale's point about the brute force attack, we also implement at the same time, we'll implement a lockout policy. What this means is that after 5 incorrect attempts within a given time frame, it stops the user being able to log in. This prevents the brute force attack. Brute force attack, many of you might have heard about the iPhone iCloud hack a few years ago, where all the celebrities' pictures were leaked. That was a brute force attack. So, the second one that's often discounted is a strong update strategy. It's important to keep all your systems as up to date as possible. It's important that you're updating all of it as well. It's not just one individual thing. So that includes Windows updates, Office updates, Java, Flash Player, antivirus client updates, as well as any other third-party software which you use. Updates and patches are released for a reason. The developers don't just get bored and release a patch. They're there to improve security against known issues, as well as safeguarding against potential future threats. As an example, hands up who heard about the NHS being hit by WannaCry earlier on this year? Pretty much everyone. So did you know that Microsoft released an update to help protect against the majority of variations of WannaCry 2 months before the attack happened? So the updates are released for a reason. It might still have happened, but it wouldn't have been anywhere near as newsworthy. The other part is don't use outdated software or operating systems. So if any of you still got Windows XP, Windows Vista, Server 2003 in your environments, these have all now reached end of life with Microsoft. What that means is they will no longer get the security patches or the updates that the other operating systems will get, which obviously means they're more vulnerable to attacks like WannaCry. So the next point is antivirus. So a strong antivirus, coupled with good user training, will prevent 99% of all mainstream breaches. It's vital to have an antivirus on any machine that accesses your corporate network. It's also important to regularly check and update the client version of the antivirus that's installed on each machine, as well as checking the antivirus is updating automatically. It all comes back to the previous point again, updates are released for a reason. So, now these 3 areas I've just talked about are all simple things to implement and should be standard for all businesses. There's nothing difficult or complicated about making sure you do these things to protect your business. And I'm sure the information that I've given you is already well known to most of you. Now, I'd like to talk about additional measures we think you should consider to go that extra step to help protect your data and your business from security risks. Multi-factor authentication. So, multi-factor authentication should be used wherever it's available. Whether this is Facebook sending you a login code to your mobile, or using an authentication app to confirm if it's you trying to access your work PC. As a demonstration, again, everyone put your hands up if you've got Facebook. Okay, so keep your hand up if you've got Facebook linked to anything else, so whether that's LinkedIn, Ocado, Amazon, Spotify, Twitter, Instagram, if you've got it linked to anything else. Again, the majority of you. So, keep your hand up if you haven't gone into the Facebook security settings and enabled the multi-factor authentication option. So if you haven't done that, so again, it's quite a lot of you. It's there, but it's disabled by default. You have to manually go in and turn it on. But to all those people that haven't got it turned on, if I got into your account, I now have access to everything else. To your Ocado, to your Amazon, to Spotify, to anything else that you've got your Facebook linked to. Adding multi-factor authentication just adds another layer of security. So, imagine that, but on your work network. Suddenly, someone has access to all the payroll data, to the HR records, to the company files. Anything that they want access to is now theirs. That can easily be prevented by using a multi-factor authentication app to confirm a remote login. We use and recommend a simple app, which we can demonstrate for you at a future date, if you want to see it working. All this does is when a remote user tries to connect to your PC, you get an alert on your phone just asking you to confirm or deny whether it's you. If it's you tick allow, it lets you in. If it's not you tick deny, that connection's terminated. There's also a multi-factor authentication app available for Office 365. So this secures your Outlook access, it secures your SharePoint, your OneDrive, anything else that you've got in 365 and can be logged into online, it just asks you for a prompt. It's worth noting with that thing, with the Office 365, we can whitelist your normal internal IP. So basically it will only ask you to prompt when you're outside of your network. So you won't get annoying prompts every time you try and sign into your emails at work. So, next one is Deslock or ESET endpoint encryption. Again, Rob's already gone through this, so I'll just comment that we'd recommend this on all your machines, but especially on laptops and tablet devices that are portable, taken off-site, just because they are so much easier just to lift. But yeah, everything else Rob's already been through, so I won't bore you saying the same thing. So the next one is the backup strategy. This is another area that's often forgotten about, until it's needed the most. A solid backup strategy ensures that if the worst does happen, and you get hit by ransomware, or a malicious user deletes important files, or even someone accidentally deletes files, a good backup strategy ensures that we can get you up and running as fast as possible. The key to backups is redundancy. So on-site backups should use multiple disks, which are rotated frequently, with the spare disks being taken off-site to ensure they're not being affected by anything physical which could happen to the server. There's no point having 3 disks if they're all sat next to the server. If the server gets flooded, all the disks are now gone. We would also recommend an off-site backup to run in tangent to this, such as Microsoft Azure, of any business critical data. It's much more resistant to ransomware due to the encryption that Azure uses to transfer, but it means that we can get that data, again, it's just another way that we can get it done for you. Our security audits. So we've now started to offer security audits to all our customers. Some of you might have received a letter already about this. These checks, basically we check over the whole general network, device security across all of the infrastructure devices in your network against common threats and weaknesses. It checks a sample of client machines as well to check things as updates, antivirus. We also check the physical security of the main network infrastructure, servers, routers, firewalls, etc. Because the easiest way to gain access to a server is if you've physically got the server in front of you. If someone can walk in, pick up your server, it saves a lot of time trying to access it remotely. Because the security audits are done by us, they can be tailored to a specific request by you. If you want us to focus on particular areas or you want to ask us to look at certain things, we can do that as well. At the end of the audit, a full report is written up and then sent over to you with any recommendations that we found from the audit. And we'll also provide quotes for any recommendations that we provide. It's worth noting that these aren't a penetration test. If you want a penetration test after the audit, we can certainly arrange these for you. We have a company that will do those for us, but it's not a full penetration test. So all there is left to say is there will be several of us around to talk afterwards about anything that you've seen either in this presentation or previous presentations. So you can either talk to myself, we've got Ashley Proctor, who's our technical consultant, or Dan Smith, who's our operations manager, and there's also Dan Schoen and Peter Barnfield. If you want to talk to anything, thanks for listening. That was me.
Now it's sort of over to question and answer time, so if you have any questions, you can direct them to the panel now. Anybody got any questions?
Quick question to Claire about GDPR and liabilities personal on directors' officers.
So this is something that I know the ICO's talked about, and it is a potential. I think the ICO would like there to be personal liability for directors. It's not something that's in the GDPR that as far as I'm aware, but whether or not it's something that we'll implement kind of in the UK, and also whether or not it's something that, and I'm not an employment lawyer, but whether or not where there are kind of provisions currently under UK where directors do something where they're acting outside their duties, for example, and they can have employment liabilities and personal liability that way as well. So it is something that businesses need to think about, and that could potentially happen, directors having personal liability for GDPR breaches.
So I've got a question for Claire as well. You just touched on ESET being, as they are, finished. However, you also mentioned that there's no right to charge for personal information. My understanding is as long as it's legitimate, there is. For example, the banks are going to continue making a charge.
All right. Well, I mean, GDPR says you can't charge people for asking for a copy of their personal data unless it's a repeated request. and then you can charge a reasonable kind of costs for providing a second copy. So whether or not that's what they're relying on, I'm not
I think
sure.
the £10's gone altogether because that's
Yeah.
the standard, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that's gone, and
Yeah.
there's no one allowed. But reasonably, the banks are going to continue doing PIRs, which is a DSAR from a commercial point of view, and at the moment they're at £4, and they're going to continue with those. But I understand they're going to migrate that across to consumers as well.
Right. Okay. That's not something that I've heard of, so
Okay.
I'm not sure if that would be GDPR compliant. But I know what GDPR says is that you can't charge for it unless you are providing a second copy of it, and then you can charge you reasonable expenses for having to do another copy.
Okay.
It's just about current consent. So if we've got a consent that currently meets the requirements of current data protection, is that, once GDPR comes into effect, is that consent still valid?
Well, that then depends. That's where it's worth going back and looking at how you're collecting consent now, and whether or not you think it's, is data protection Act compliant, but do you think it's GDPR compliant? Because on the 25th of May 2018, the consent that you have at that point needs to be GDPR compliant. So it might not necessarily be the case that the consents you have now, for example, sending out marketing, if you've used kind of opt-out tick boxes, for example, it wouldn't be GDPR compliant, so you would need to go back and get those consents again to a GDPR standard before GDPR comes into force for them to be compliant when it does.
Sorry, Claire. Just touching on that, the MDA rules mentioned 2 years, stipulate 6 months before refresh of data permissions, which is obviously in conflict with the 2 years which you mentioned. Is that specifically for a sector, or is that just a generalisation that we could be gazumped by your own personal regulator on that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Well, in terms of the consent guidance, that only relates to consent, so where you're relying on consent for use of personal data.
Yeah.
So that does tend to be in a marketing context, and that's where it is in draft form, but the ICO says we want you to go out every 2 years and make sure that where people are consented to use of their personal data, you're refreshing that consent every 2 years to make sure, again, just about giving people more kind of choice and power over their personal data, and they're still happy to receiving those things.
And just leading on from that, the specific, what's happened to term this, reason for consent, typically has been in relation to a sector. Does it have to be in relation to a business particular, a specific business to contact you rather than a sector to contact you?
So in terms of the consent?
So for example, we'd like to call you in relation to financial services, and you may be contacted by one of our partners. Does it have to be what partners' names are?
Yeah, so that's what the draft guidance says at the minute. So if you want to allow other parties to contact individuals on your behalf, you need to be naming those parties and allowing people to say yes or no to each of them. And you need to be giving people more information. So saying, we'd like to contact you about financial services might be enough information to say, that is informed consent. But where it's things like, we'd like to send you about news and offers, the ICO really wants you to be telling people a lot more, well, what are they going to be receiving from you, what kind of offers, what kind of news, financial services, that might be more detailed enough for your business, for your customers to know what that means. But are the consent tick boxes really telling people what they're really consenting to be receiving? So that's what you should be really thinking about when you're looking at that.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Just a quick one, just on that. So presumably, platforms like Mailchimp and so on will be adjusting their consent policies in line with.
Yeah, they'll have to. Yeah, they'll have to be looking at their policies and updating them before GDPR comes into force.
Brilliant. Councillor Chapman, you said your name, but everything that's been discussed and really been seems to be Windows-based, Netflix and so on. We use iPads and iOS and Apple an awful lot within our business and day-to-day work. The antivirus, obviously, I think only applies to Windows. How does encryption and security and so on work for tablets mainly?
It's a tricky one. I mean, our AV will work with Mac. But as you're probably aware as a Mac user, iOS and Mac is a very close platform, and as a result at the moment we haven't been able to get our encryption on there. My understanding is that there is encryption available for Mac, built into it. I don't know enough about it to expand any further than that, but at the moment we haven't got encryption for Mac. We hope to have it at some point if they'll let us do it. Simple as that.
Great stuff. Any other questions? No? Well, a huge thanks to our speakers today. Thank you very much for their time. And I hope you found this workshop useful. So just a caveat to these talks and the security audit that we offer. By no means is this that you carrying out the security audit or coming along to this talk is you compliant to GDPR. That's not what we're saying. With new cyber threats constantly appearing and the GDPR scope being so wide and every business being so different in its systems and requirements, it's impossible to have an all-encompassing solution. So it's something that business leaders and stakeholders in your organisation need to think about. So better train your staff, ensure that they're careful with your proprietary data and also your customers' data. Educate them from being socially engineered. Some things can be as simple as asking us at Apex to change your password strategy. So we hope that we've posed some interesting topics for you to go away and think about. Ensuring you have a safe cyber environment and compliance to GDPR is vital to any business. So you've already done a great job by coming here because I think it's on your peripheral already and you're thinking about it. But yeah, thank you very much for your time. There's going to be some sandwiches served in the next 5-10 minutes. So feel free to stick around and speak to Rob, Claire or Nathaniel or any of the guys at the back. Thank you.